Before I go into my actual presentation, at least what I've been asked to speak on today, I have a personal confession to make. So, I have been doing pro-life work now for about 11 years. And in those 11 years, there is, I think, only one place where I have longed to speak to a pro-life community, and that is Ireland. And by the end of this talk, you will know why exactly. I'm not just saying it. I have spoken in 24 countries now, but many cities in those 24 countries. Something like 70 different cities, and done so many pro-life talks, and spoken at about 10 different marches for life, from United States Walk for Life to Slovakia and Spain. Like, I've been at all kinds of places where I've been thinking, what am I really doing here? Because I can only speak English, and even the audience don't really, English is not the language, the language of communication. So I have been in some incredible places, but of all these places, I was always longing to come to Ireland. Because I have felt, from even before I joined the pro-life movement as an activist, I have had a bit of this feeling that I was a little bit Irish. And again, you're going to know why, because you look at me and you say, well, she's not Irish. I know. But I've always felt that I was born of the Irish. I don't know how many of you who have contact, like maybe you work in a place or you have been in a neighborhood where there's a Nigerian, but not like the young the Gen Z Nigerians, and no disrespect to them. I'm speaking of like an old Nigerian person who had lived in Nigeria many years, and maybe the person was Catholic. I don't know how many of you have had that kind of exposure, but I come from that sort of generation. So Ireland has always been for me in many ways a spiritual home. But my real home is Africa. I come from the southeastern part of Nigeria, which is, of course, Nigeria is this country on the western coast of the African continent, for those who don't know. And I come from the southeastern part, and we exist in tribes. So I come from the Igbo tribe. And for many, of course, I was born there and raised there and went to university there and started working as a laboratory scientist at a hospital in Nigeria. I think I would say, or I'd like to believe, that I had a good understanding of my people and our culture, our language. I was what you call a true African girl to the core, and very proud of my African identity. And then I moved out to the UK about okay, I'm going to say it now, but don't judge me. Don't do the maths. I came out to do my master's in London about 17 years ago, but I'm only 25 now. You understand that, right? So I moved to the UK, and afterwards I was very fortunate to have gotten a good job at a hospital. And in fact, initially I was sent out to Enniskillen, to Northern Ireland to work, and I had a great Irish experience. Again, that thing that I have this Irish thing in my background going. So it was such a good experience for me. But I had to go back to the mainland. Like, I went back to England and started working in my career very very focused on the one thing, which was to really be the best scientist I could be, to do the best I could do by my family, to earn a living. But about 11 years ago, I did have a strange experience that I was watching the television, and Melinda Gates, the wife of Bill Gates, came on, and I know anyone who has followed me for a long time would know the origin story of my work. Not that I am a superhero or anything, but origin story is kind of what we can say to make you understand there's a life before what I'm doing now. So I was watching the TV, and Melinda Gates came on, and she was talking about some project she was doing for the African continent, and I was very interested, very innocently interested in what she was talking about. Then I realized she was raising some funds for some kind of big, massive, what I'll call population control project, but she was calling it a family planning event. And I was quite upset, but then I started learning about how the African countries were getting funding from overseas. Because before, for me, it was such an abstract thing. Yes, I always knew that African countries were at the mercy of the international donors. That has always been bred into us from when we were little. My parents will always say, oh, if you work really hard, I bet you can get a scholarship from the British Council or the American Embassy. It's always there where we believe that we're constantly getting from them, or, we depend on their generosity. So for me, foreign aid meant some scholarship program. It meant some, provision of water in a community that does not have access to clean drinking water. It meant bringing electricity supplies to people. It meant, of course, building good hospitals, improving the lives of people, especially in the rural parts of the African continent where people don't have access to those things. So I was always of this idea that foreign aid is good, and foreign aid helps people to come out of poverty. So of course, on that day, 11 years ago, I was very keen on knowing what this was about, but then following what I had learned, I then went into it with some fierceness. And I started learning that the African countries indeed got money from the various Western donors, organized. Some of them are from from Europe, so many of them come from the European Union, but of course there's the United States on one side, who was a major player, there's Canada, and there are other countries within this economic community. So the more I looked into these money relationships, or these donor-recipient relationships, the more scandalized I became. Because, my dear friends, I then came to realize that with one hand, our Western donors were giving us money, but with another hand, they are writing out policies that they think we should actually be implementing in the different African countries. One of those things, of course, at the top of that list is abortion. Why? Because many of the sub-Saharan African countries do not have legalized abortion, from one country to the next, because of course we'll make it clear from the get-go, Africa is not a country, and I know most of you know that, everyone here knows that. Africa is made up of many, many countries. There's more than 1 billion people on the African continent. We speak different languages, many faith professions, and so it's a real diverse continent in every sense of it. But among the Africans, at least from my experience, even at that time, 11 years ago, before I came into the pro-life movement, I knew that there were common threads, even though our cultures and customs might be different. But the perception from one country to another, especially when it comes to the dignity of the human person, to the sanctity of life, they all understood it in a very similar way. I have some friends actually from Uganda. And one of them is a doctor, a gynecologist, who works very much in the rural areas. So she, every month, I think they go in for some medical mission right into the villages, and they're speaking to these women who cannot even speak English. But the women know what abortion is. It's just so people know that the Africans, we do know that we don't have legalized abortion does not mean that we don't know what abortion is. We know what abortion is. We know what it feels like to have a problem that you feel I'm not ready for. We know what unintended pregnancy is. But then the African people also understand that to remove a child growing inside the mother is an attack against human life. We understand that a child in the womb is very much alive and being awaited by the community out there, whether rich or poor. And that did not vary no matter which friend I was speaking to. So this, my Ugandan friend, had gone to a village and she was speaking to some women in a village. And when they talked about abortion, they said, yeah, somebody had an abortion. They said, yeah, she went to sacrifice her baby. Like how you talk about sacrificing a child to the gods. There's an old language or an old expression. So they took it like, no, she sacrificed that child. Like a sacrifice. It's not like, oh, I had to sacrifice my time to come here. No, it's like I killed somebody. Like you kill a goat to the gods for those who don't believe in the Jesus Christ that we believe in today. So it's for you to know that even in many parts of Africa, even in places where they may not be Christian or it may not have been quite ingrained, they still understand there is something highly abominable, highly tragic about having to kill a child that is inside the mother. Even when they can't speak English and they can't get access to words like choice. But they understand what it means to end the life of a child that is waiting to be born. Even people who don't have access to ultrasounds. So I came to learn about these common threads and these beliefs and these very strong values. And that was how I knew that I have to start raising my voice to tell people that indeed there is something really condescending that a wealthy person like the Gates or the Clintons or a wealthy nation like the United States or Great Britain could come to any African country and say to them, we will give you this amount of millions so that you can bring abortion in, because abortion is a choice, and healthcare. There is something really painful for an African like myself to consider that. We do respect life by our culture, by our tradition. Even in the way we speak our native language from one place to another, it is deeply ingrained into our native tongue, the sanctity of life. I am Igbo, and even in my language, we have names for baby girls like Chinwendo. Chinwendo, God owns life. So imagine that a culture that can name their baby girl Chinwendo can then turn around and say, let's forget our traditions and our values. Let's just block it a bit so that we can get access to words like choice and reproductive justice and reproductive health. So by the time I started going to international platform meetings, United Nations, even at one time the European Parliament in Brussels, to look at what was going on, to witness, to be at several meetings, to be at several side events, the more I listened to the activists and the politicians speak from Western countries about how abortion should become an international right or a universal right, the more painful it was for me, and the more scandalized I was, and the more, I'd say, the more determined I was to make sure that I was going to speak up, not as one person, but I will be speaking up for the different African countries. And I know some people find it very painful and they want to tell me to shut up. But in the meantime, I'm saying to them, I will not keep quiet, I will not shut up, I will not be silenced. I will stand here as a bridge between my people and the evil people who have the money to make sure I show people exactly what these wealthy people want our countries to implement, and that's abortion. So in reality, the international community has spent a lot of money on abortion. I know that will not come to you as a surprise because we were all here this morning when someone had mentioned just Ireland alone in the last, the last few years. You've only been a few years to the game. You came late to the game, but already they've spent 46 million euros. So imagine how much the international community is investing on this project, this ideological project. They are spending billions, I can tell you. They're spending billions on this project. And how does it work? So a country like the United States has a large budget that goes to foreign aid, that goes to international health and all of that. So every year they make out the budget, and there is meant to be money going to education in the international work. There's meant to be money going to healthcare and what they call civics and civil society. They have money that they invest in infrastructure to help nations, have things like good roads and maybe some buildings done or electricity or what have you. But then they also have money for what they call the population programs. And the graph, I wish I could show it to you, but the graph just goes all the way up like this from the time they started giving money to this designation. And so they bring the budget. Every country in the West has an aim or a target to spend about 0.7% of the national budget on international aid or foreign aid. So that's a lot of money, and those are a lot of billions. And what happens is they keep giving it, and then instead of giving it to healthcare, proper healthcare, real maternal health improvements, real child care improvements, they are giving it to third-party organizations like International Planned Parenthood Federation, Marie Stopes International, who now says they're not Marie Stopes International, they're calling themselves now MSI Reproductive Choices. Again, the word choices, because they found out that Marie Stopes was a huge eugenicist, and so they have to be ashamed of their past. Somebody here was mentioning about earlier on, one of the amazing speakers before me said something about Margaret Sanger. Well, we also had Marie Stopes as well, and now MSI Reproductive Choices is one of the biggest third-party reproductive organizations that operate on the continent of Africa. So these organizations, International Planned Parenthood Federation, MSI Reproductive Choices, DKT International, the Clinton Foundation, they all get this money. They vie for this money, and the money is kind of partitioned amongst them. And then they take it to the African countries where they all have like projects going, they have offices. And when they set up shop, what do you think they're doing with the money? They're not building hospitals for us. They are working on new policies to get African countries to legalize abortion. They are trying to find and sort of radicalize, I guess I can put it that way, people at the fringes of our different countries so that they can get the so-called African feminists and then give them enough funding, empower them, and direct them towards our political realm so that they can go into the parliament and bring in abortion bills and try to pass it. They have succeeded in some places, and they have failed woefully in many other places. And many times, I would say this here because yes, it is true. They engage almost in bribe because they are constantly getting our African parliamentarians to let down your hair, let's take you on a retreat, let's give you some nice money. When you're in any African country, the dollar is nice to have, The euros is very sweet. The pound is very powerful. And we see these three currencies coming in. We're seeing the deep-pocketed organizations coming in with them, and they are deep-pocketed because they've gotten it from the Western governments who empower them. So they go in and they're trying to change our laws, and they're trying to radicalize girls. They're going into universities. They are having access to even our highest ministries, our Ministry for Health, our Ministry for Education. They're going in as partners, as stakeholders. These are the kind of names that they call themselves. And when they go in, they're smiling, they're doing parties. They are able to throw parties at the beautiful hotels we have in our capitals, where normal, ordinary people, talk less of poor people, cannot even afford to be there. But whenever you see them having a party at a Hilton in Addis Ababa, you know where the money is coming from. You know that's not the local currency. That's the dollar or the euro that is hosting this kind of party. And our politicians love these kinds of parties. So they're really working hard. And they have been working hard for the last couple of years. And that is why, yes, I started speaking about it as a kind of colonialism, the ideological neo-colonialism. I have also seen it as a kind of cultural imperialism, because they're coming to an Africa that has already set values, set views. People know what abortion is. Yes, there are people who are engaging in it, but even they know that this cannot be a virtue. No, it cannot be a healthcare. This is still a vice in society. Abortion will always be a vice in society. So anybody who tells you that it is not is lying. They are colonials. I even think, there's this term that I came to learn after I came to the West. And it's been thrown around. And many times when it's brought up, people are very tense. So I also bring it up when I'm speaking, and whenever I say it, everybody is tense because they don't know what I mean by it. It's white supremacy. See, everybody is afraid, like, what does she mean? I've heard it so many times, especially in the last few years, especially from the Americans. They speak a lot about it. But I'm going to say something very controversial now. I have lived in the UK for 17 years. Personally, Obianuju, I have never once experienced white supremacy against me. Okay? I have never. Okay, maybe somebody else might come out and say, oh, Uju, I'm black, and see what happened to me in London. Well, I went to school in London. I have lived in Enniskillen. I have lived in Preston. I've lived in Canterbury, where all the posh people live, and now I live in the Midlands. And honestly, I have never experienced white supremacy. So I don't really know what it means. I know what they say it means, but I don't really know what it looks like. But I'll tell you what I know very well, and that is ideological supremacy. I have had people discriminate against me for saying that I am against abortion. I've had people spit at my feet for praying outside an abortion clinic in Cardiff. I have had people speak down to me because I say, I don't think abortion can ever be rated as healthcare. So that, my friends, is ideological supremacy. And I will stand beside any one of you to say, we have had people feel that they are superior to us because we are sitting in this gathering as pro-life people. We are victims together. And we continue to fight as the true minorities. No matter the color you are, no matter the language you are speaking. If a French pro-life person were sitting here, the person will actually understand what we mean. I went to Slovakia to speak a few years ago. They too have the same experience. So we all together around the world who believe that human life begins at conception and human life should be protected without exceptions, we are the ones who have our superiors bear down against us. That is ideological supremacy, and we have been recipients of it for a very long time. Now, I'm sure all of you are sitting here wondering, okay, we get what she's saying. So America comes into an African country and they're trying to get abortion legalized. And the UK does the same through DFID, and maybe France and these big countries. But where is our Republic of Ireland in all of this? Where do we fall in? Ireland, for a long time, has had some foreign aid projects in several African countries. I admit that Ireland is not one of the major players, but they are doing their bit. For the economy you have, they are still aiming to put out their 0.7%, because the Western countries, I think, naturally are generous. Many of them actually target to put out their 0.7% in budget for foreign aid. So no matter the size of the economy among the Western nations, I noticed that they all still aiming to do it. So for a very long time, Ireland, the Republic of Ireland has had projects in Ethiopia, Mozambique, Uganda, Malawi, Sierra Leone, Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, great projects. And I think you had some sort of policy, or at least some understanding, that the money of the Irish taxpayer will never, ever go to funding abortions. So I want to thank you for the policies you had from many, many years ago. Now, 2018, there was an earthquake. It's not the one that we saw in Haiti in 2010, but felt very much the same way, at least for me it did. That was the referendum in Ireland. Because by 2019, abortion could then be legalized here. And one of the first things that happened within 60 days, I think, was that the matter of Irish foreign aid was raised. I don't know, because a lot of the people here may have been so engrossed as to what was going on, and many times I think within the pro-life movement we are so overwhelmed and so outnumbered and so out-resourced that we're so keen and focused on what is happening locally that we tend not to notice things happening internationally. So I'm glad to be here so I can tell you exactly what has happened from Ireland facing the developing world. So in 2019, 60 days or about 60 days after abortion, the first abortion started here, your government reviewed the policy they had, and they had put out this thing they called a Better World policy, the Better World policy, which kind of sounds very innocuous, but then they made it very, very clear that SRHR, which stands for Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights, was going to be reviewed from the point of view of the Irish foreign aid, or how Ireland did its foreign aid. They made a very curious statement, the minister at the time. He said that there has to be coherence with our policy, our international policy, and our domestic policy. So in other words, they sent out a signal that now that we have abortion, it's only natural, it's only coherent that we are going to come out full force and fund abortions. And so, Ireland, unfortunately, started to fund projects and third-party organizations who do provide abortions or do get involved in one way or the other with all these things happening on the African continent with regards to abortion. So it was only a few weeks ago, actually, this year, September of this year, that in your parliament, somebody had raised a question asking about how much the Irish government had spent on abortion organizations, how much of the Irish taxpayers' money is going to abortion. And I know even from the experience of what happens in at the House of Commons in the UK, it's very difficult to get them to admit or say, okay, this is exactly what is going on and this is how much money. Sometimes they put less than what they're giving, and then some other times, maybe some information will actually filter through. So they said, they got the response from the foreign minister that they have actually in 2022 given money to International Planned Parenthood Federation, to the Clinton Foundation as well, for the work they're doing in Africa. And we know that these organizations are very much involved in abortion on the African continent, one way or the other. So that's part of what your government is doing, and this is even just a little of what we have seen, or what they've agreed to or admitted to, which has gone on record. It was in 2019, during an international conference called the ICPD, International Commission on Population and Development, which was held in Nairobi, Kenya, that a group of women, many people went for the event, of course, but from Ireland, there was a delegation of women who attended the ICPD of 2019. And I found myself online arguing with people because what happened is that one of your senators at the time, who was very much involved in the Yes campaign, had tweeted, "It's great for us to be able to tell the Irish story." Mind you, she's in Nairobi writing this. She says, "It's great for us to be able to tell the Irish story." And the path that led to the decisive yes vote in the last year's referendum. This was 2019. And hopefully, we can be an inspiration to help others to change. Okay? To help others who are still fighting for a change and who are still working to get where we are. This is an Irish female senator, I will not name, but her name actually sounds like 12 o'clock with an E at the end. Okay, that is the surname. So she tweeted this and I was quite upset because this is an Irish politician who comes to Africa where the Irish are taken as, where the Irish are taken as really amazing, really good. Whenever we hear Irish, it's like the Catholic Irish. We still have this view of Ireland, and imagine that this is coming from an Irish politician, and they're coming to be an inspiration with the disastrous Yes campaign, which I won't even get into. But that she did that, it was a very painful thing, and of course I had to shoot back something. I don't remember what I said, but it wasn't very polite. But these are some of the things that we have seen. Because of everything that has happened with Ireland getting in, of course, anybody who gets in with funding abortions in Africa, I get very interested in what is going on in those countries anyway. So we are still watching to see where Ireland is going. Already, whatever happens is for people to know, even if they are in support here in Ireland of abortion, just know that your tax money is going probably to some abortion organization to spread the ideology on the African continent. Is that really what you want? That is a question for the Irish people. Is that really what you want? That in a place where there are people who still don't have access to clean drinking water, access to good education, access to electricity, you are paying for abortions, or you are paying for them to get abortions. It's a shame. It is a shame. I have heard all kinds of things that, even just sitting here at this conference, learning all the statistics and things that are happening, and I have also followed very closely online while waiting for the Irish to invite me, okay, which it took 10 years. But I've seen what has happened here. The more than 34,000 abortions that have already been done here since abortion was legalized. I have seen the unfortunate reality of the fact that probably one of these days, Ireland is going to somehow eliminate Down syndrome, and we know how that is going to happen, but that's already in the works because there's prenatal testing. This is a Western country, and prenatal testing usually comes with the offer for abortion. We have heard about bubble zones today, and I had heard it before as well, before I came here, and the fact that they're trying to even stop pro-life people from being able to pray or speak out outside abortion facilities. We've seen all of this. And my reaction to this is deep sorrow, very profound sorrow. I am not Irish. Yes, I did live in Northern Ireland, but I would consider myself a foreigner to Ireland. But again, that thing comes where I say Ireland is for me home. Ireland is home in many ways, and I'll tell you all about it now. Can you please cue the picture? It's very grainy, but you can see that's me from many, many years ago. It is true what they say, that black don't crack. That's so many years ago, but so when I was growing up in Nigeria, before I came to the UK, I had my grandmother who was a very devout Catholic. I mean, I come from a Catholic family. I mean, that's full disclosure, yeah? But my grandmother was particularly very devout, always had a rosary, always talked about the Legion of Mary. And, we had to learn all the prayers, even when we didn't feel like, and she didn't speak English, but she made us, her grandchildren, like she would take us with her to the block rosary and all of that when we were growing up in Nigeria. And even like when we go to spend Christmas with her, even before we got electricity in my village, we were carrying our little lanterns to the block rosary at night because my grandmother said so. Even though we didn't, it wasn't always much fun sometimes standing out as a child, being bitten by mosquitoes, and then my grandmother, all she wants to do was say her rosary out in the dark somewhere. But she always said something to us. The Irish. She would say, the Irish made me Catholic. The Irish taught me the gospel. They taught me the rosary. They taught me about Legion of Mary. She always spoke about the Irish. And then I was 8 years old. I was 9 years old. I was like, what is she talking about? I just want to get indoors. But one day I grew older, and my grandmother was long dead. And I decided for some reason to retrace my steps and learn about my history and learn particularly about how we got the gospel. And so this was before I started even doing pro-life work. I wanted to do some missiology, some serious missiology, just tracing back who preached the gospel to my grandmother, who baptized her at the age of 20-something. Like she was born pagan, raised pagan, and then got married and became a Christian. She was baptized by the Irish. So I was telling my dad, I want to do some serious work, some serious history work. So he was telling me like all the details that he knew, and we were taking notes and trying to get documents, photocopies of things, trying to trace like a kind of a spiritual genealogy, if you like. So who was the priest that baptized her? Where did he come from? Oh, Donegal. Oh, Dublin. So we were making these connections. So by the time I came to the UK, I had enough details. And so I called my dad and I promised him that I was going to go to Ireland just to find out how we got the gospel, who brought it to my village, who did all those works that we still were seeing, reaping the fruits of, and we see the roots of it. So my dad gave me his blessing, of course, and then I came here that year. That was, I think, in 2012, and there was the Eucharistic Congress that was going on. So I decided to go to the Holy Rosary Sisters convent, and I had called them up before the Eucharistic Congress, and I said, I'm coming out to Ireland. Will you please connect me or allow me to speak to any of the sisters who would have been in Nigeria, back in the 50s, the 50s and the 60s, if anybody is still alive. So they told me on the phone, actually, there's one person who is still alive. I mean, there were two, but one, I think, had dementia. But there was one who was still quite lucid, quite alive. She was 89 years old at the time, and I made an appointment to come see her. So during the Eucharistic Congress, one of the days, I went out, and I went to see Sister Helen King, who was right there in the picture with me. And she knew I was coming. They asked me why I was coming. I said, because, my grandparents were baptized by the Irish. My dad was educated by the Irish. We got the rosary and the faith and the gospel, essentially, from the Irish, and many other things. We got our education and all of that through those channels as well. So I said I wanted to come in and just speak to somebody. So the sister said, okay. So Helen King was there, and that day I came in, I sat down, and I started to thank her for the work that they did among my people. Because I'll tell you, before the Irish came, we had every culture has its problems. It's not because I'm saying, yes, we are pro-life and all that, but in the root of various cultures, there might be something, especially before Christianity, that is problematic. Now, in my own tradition, anytime twins were born, baby twins, they had to be killed because of some traditional belief that they were a split spirit. So when the Irish sisters and the Irish priests, the Holy Ghost fathers, were among us, they did a lot of work to convince my people that you should never take life away, even no matter what you believe about that life. Even if you feel, oh, this child's life is worthless, is problematic, is unwanted, is, this is such a shame to society, to our society, you should never kill a child. So the Irish taught us that, and they did come across a lot of resistance because this was a deep, deep belief. People didn't want to keep their twin babies at all. They didn't want, any baby that was born an albino or maybe with some deformity. Once that child is born, the child is taken out to a forest and left there to die. This didn't happen 500 years ago. I mean, this was happening by the time my father was born in the 1930s. They were killing actively babies that were problematic. So these sisters and the priests went into our villages and they started convincing people. And this took many years. The first Irish priest that came to my side of Nigeria is called Bishop Shanahan. You may have heard of him. Joseph Shanahan, he came from Tipperary County. And he came, and then later on, he went and brought some more sisters. So I started learning about their work, and even sitting there with Sister Helen for all those hours, I was asking her questions. And I was asking her, so how were you doing the work? How did you manage? How did you speak the language? How were you able to transmit so much faith and the values to the people? And one after the other, every question I asked her, she would laugh and then she would start answering. They had schools for girls, they had the nursing schools, they were teaching women, when you're pregnant, you do need a special kind of care, which is now what we know as prenatal care. And they were helping women through their pregnancy and then eventually to give birth when it's time to deliver their babies. So she told me all of these things that they were doing in the 1950s. She was a nurse in the 1950s. So you can imagine the caliber of this woman. And in the 1960s, they were still there when the Nigerian Civil War started, but they refused to leave. The summary of what I'm saying here is that these Irish came to us without expecting anything, any gain. As you all know, Ireland is a country that didn't colonize anybody. You are not Great Britain. You didn't colonize anyone. But the Irish were in Nigeria, and they came to the British and they said, all we've come for is just to spread the gospel. We haven't come to take, okay? The British came to take, they ruled us, they had offices, but the Irish came to the British and said, just show us where we can build churches and schools for children and maternity homes. And the British, being the British, pointed to the forests, deep in the forest, and said, you can take all that. So in reality, when you come to my place now, when you come to Owerri, you find the big Anglican churches, all the facilities that the British had done. You would see them in the big cities. But when you go to the villages, you would see the handwork, the painstaking handwork of the Irish, who literally were told to go into the deep forest to do the work. And when they got to the deep forest, they found my people, and then they started to do the work. The Irish missionaries suffered, and they put in so much work without expecting any gain. They were pioneer pro-lifers. As far as I'm concerned, if they made us to stop killing twins, that is some sort of pro-life work, and they did it. Some of them died. Some of them, were separated from their families. Some of them who, even though they loved Ireland, they still had to stay away in order to be able to preach the gospel to these people who they weren't even sure were going to convert, were going to leave their paganism, who they weren't sure, where is this mission going? But for so many years, your ancestors came to my ancestors and they lived among my people. And even when they didn't get love, they were still giving love. They were still giving love until during the war. Now, I asked Sister Helen, so what happened during the war? She said to me, well, we were missionaries. We could not leave. We didn't want to leave. We were told to leave. We were permitted to leave, but we didn't go anywhere. The English missionaries were all running off, and all the English colonials were just being taken out, because at the time, of course, colonialism had just come to an end a few years before. But Sister Helen said we weren't going to go anywhere. And they stayed up until the time they were arrested by the Civil War, the soldiers. And they were locked up for months, some of them. And eventually, they were deported to Ireland as if they were criminals. And they came back here. Much suffering. So on that day, a sister was speaking to me. I cried. I started to weep. And she said, why are you crying? I said, because for your work, I exist the way I do today. And mind you, I'm coming to her, 50 years after she had left Nigeria. So she just stays silent, and she looked at me, and she said, do you know you are the first person who has come to me to say thank you? So today, I want you to appreciate, because I'm sure what I'm saying now about the Irish coming to Nigeria, and many other African countries, by the way, it's not just, this is my own personal experience. I know some of you already know it, what your ancestors did. Maybe you had a great uncle who may have been a priest in Nigeria and even died there. They gave their lives for this cause. And today I'm coming here to tell you about it, not so that you can be a Catholic missionary. We have enough. Today, you know that the African church is thriving. The African churches will have priests and sisters, and we have everything. But we're never going to take these fruits without knowing the roots. Today, I can tell you so much about what you can do as a pro-life activist or as just a pro-life person. And a lot of the speakers before me have just perfectly told us what we should be doing. Amazing things, how you should get involved, get informed, appear at, prayer chains, 40 Days for Life campaigns, go to the National March for Life, come for the PLC conference like you are now. There is so much I could tell you, so much. But I will tell you one thing in addition to everything that you've been told today, I want you to be like the Irish missionaries, the unstoppable Irish missionaries, the blessed Irish missionaries who went all out for a cause that they didn't know where it was going, how they were going to get, let's say, compensated for it. They gave their lives for the cause. They gave everything for the cause. I want you to be the same Irish people. I want you to be of the same mindset. The humility of those missionaries who came to our villages, how unassuming they were, how much resistance did they get? They knew they were going to probably die doing this work, but they didn't realize that one day a grandchild of a person who learned who learned the gospel or learned some value or learned the faith would one day come back to say thank you. I want you to know that today, I know it looks grim, at least from where I'm standing. Those bubble zones, that yes campaign, the 66% that is held over your head, the mandate that your politicians say they have to do what they do, or to put the money, the taxpayers' money, where they're putting it. It's all happening now. But dear friends, in history, where will all that fall in? Where will it fall in? All that is going to fade. In the same way, people decided that the Irish missionaries were doing a wasted work. They were working in the forest. They were tilling dry ground. Nothing was going to come of it. Oh, it's not even imaginable that Nigeria will have such faith from the work that they were doing. I need you to be in that same mindset. Perhaps you're not going to see those results, but in the 40 years' time, in 50 years' time, what is going to happen? We are going to be dependent on the work that you are doing today. We are going to be dependent on your own persistence. The one thing that I know that a lot of the Irish who were home back in the 40s and 50s and 60s, when all the missionaries were going, the one thing I know they were doing was to support the work of people who were going to the missions. The Irish gave everything. I think you will admit, right? You have sort of always been like a poor country. I don't know, I might be wrong. But you're sort of like poor, right? Compared to the British, right? But you need to see the churches they built in Nigeria with Irish money. They were building schools in bushes where children were still going naked without clothes. But the Irish had this vision for human dignity. Not just do we want these children looking dignified, but we think one day among these children, we're going to have doctors and we're going to have lawyers, and they just wanted it just for the sake of just the missions. They weren't going to bring the children back to Ireland. There was no ulterior motive. I need you to do the same. I need you to support the organizations who are doing pro-life work now. Not because next year there will be another referendum, maybe we can then get our big win. Maybe, we might not even win if, the next couple of debates happening at the parliament. Or perhaps you would still see that the pro-abortion side is almost flourishing. It pains me to use that word. But you need to support that work that is going on from organizations like PLC, who are still here doing the work against the current, fighting, working, knowing that one day you were sitting at a PLC conference and you saw the product of your Irish missionaries. You saw the product of the fact that somebody can have a mission and hold out on that mission, not because of anything you're going to gain today. No, nobody can abort you. But because in the next 40 years, perhaps we will see an end to abortion. And those who will be thanked and those who will be celebrated and those who will be talked about and remembered are the people who held out. The 33% who decided that they are not going to vote just out of emotions, they're not going to vote because their family is voting no. They will vote because they understand that human life begins at conception and they will stand by it and they will die by it. Your missionaries, your uncles, your great uncles, your grandparents, some of them died doing the work of the gospel. You have to be of the same mindset to do the work. And you have to do it for the long run, even if you don't see results. I saw this just outside. I saw this outside, and honestly, nobody asked me to do this. This is a pro-life campaign leaflet. I don't know, it's a pack on how you can support the work. This is the kind of thing I want to see everybody with. I need you to support the pro-life work that is going on. These organizations who are here, people talking about their ministries and missionaries, you are the Irish. The Irish have within their DNA the missions. And today, nobody needs you, and I'm saying this, nobody needs you to go to Nigeria and go and die. But we need you to stand here where you are and fight the evil spirit that pushed against the constitutional right to life of the unborn in your own country. We need you to become missionaries again and think with the mindset of the missionary, standing where you are, not having to leave the country, but be set and ready to do the work for the long run because you are an Irish pro-life missionary. Thank you.